Good morning, Summit. I wanted to start the day with a Danish lesson. Formgivning. As the name suggests, it's the Danish word for design. Because to design something is to give form to that which has not yet been given form. In other words, to give form to the future. And that's exactly what we do as designers when we're designing a building or a space. We are giving form to the world that we would like to find ourselves living in the future. A few examples. This is the Copenhagen Harbor Bath that sort of extends the life of the city into the water around it. When we opened it 2 decades ago, and I suddenly saw the Copenhageners sort of jumping into the water instead of sitting in their car for hours to get to the Hamptons. They could actually jump in the water in the middle of the city. It dawned on me that a clean port is not only nice for the fish, it's also amazing for the people that live in the city. And we thought maybe this is a bigger idea. And we called it hedonistic sustainability. The idea that the sustainable city or the sustainable building is not only better for the environment, but it can also be much more enjoyable for people inhabiting it. And over the last 2 decades, we've been pursuing this idea of hedonistic sustainability. This is Copenhagen. It's the cleanest waste-to-energy power plant in the world. It's so clean that the steam coming out of the chimney is actually cleaner than the air of Copenhagen itself. To sort of celebrate this invisible marvel of modern engineering, we turned the facade of the power plant into the tallest climbing wall in the world. If you need a few a specific set of skills to do this, but even if you're too chicken to climb the facade, you can actually ride a public elevator inside and enjoy all of the machinery that filters the particles from the air and scrubs the CO2. We could actually specify the color and material of each of the machines as long as it didn't cost anything. So everything that came in stainless steel, aluminum, or galvanized steel, we took it without the color, and then otherwise we tried to match it. The result is, unlike most power plants, if you've ever been inside one, this looks almost like a set from Star Wars. And once you get to the roof, you find this alpine meadow. Denmark is a country entirely without mountains. So here the Copenhageners actually can hike and climb a man-made mountain. In Sochi and in Beijing, Denmark won 0 medals. We hope that we may be able to change that fact, because now the Copenhageners can actually practice at home. And I see this as a great example of the kind of world-changing power of form giving. Is that my son is turning 4 next week, and he doesn't know that there was a time when you didn't ski on the roof of the power plant that turned the waste of the city into electricity and district heating. So for him and his entire generation, that's their baseline. So imagine, like, in a decade from now, when they have to start giving form to their future, what kind of crazy ideas they're gonna arrive at. So fast forward to March 2020. Suddenly our work environment started looking like this, as I'm sure you've all experienced. We went entirely remote, except our model workshop, because we found out that our 3D printers and the materials we make architectural models of could actually be used to making emergency medical equipment like face shields and ventilator tubes. So in the first 6 weeks of the pandemic, we managed to manufacture 25,000 of these items and donate them to the local healthcare providers. And it made us think that it just turned out almost by accident that some of the skills or tools we had in our practice could actually be used to addressing one of the biggest problems of the time. And we thought, what other things can we address? And we thought, instead of going down to the scale of products, maybe like even look at the big picture. So we asked ourselves, can we actually use our skills and our methodology as architects and planners to make a tangible, actionable plan for the entire planet? So how do you start this? We decided to start with a number, 173,000 terawatt hours per year. That's the total energy that all of humanity uses in a year. And if you look back 200 years, we've been burning wood, and then we discovered coal, oil, and natural gas. And even today, the renewables is only this kind of little sliver on top of the total pile of energy sources. And this access to an incredible energy source led to an explosion of quality of life and distributed welfare throughout the world. If you look at the parameter like life expectancy, you can see on every single continent, this access to energy has increased the quality of life. But of course, it has a well-known side effect. Every year we release 50 billion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. As a solid block of coal, it would be 2 by 2 by 2 kilometers. This is Manhattan. And every year, of course, we add another one and another one. So the main 4 greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and F gases. And they come from a whole array of human activities. And to sort of create a framework for the plan for the planet, we divided it into these let's call them 5 main verticals. The 5 verticals that contribute to greenhouse gases: it's transportation, energy, industry, food, and waste. In addition, we created another 5 verticals that are unrelated to climate change, but are essential if you want to have a sustainable human presence on Earth. So biodiversity, health, pollution, habitation, and water. And in the interest of time, I'm only going to talk to climate change today. Also, what kind of problem are we trying to solve for? This is today almost 8 billion people, but we will be 10 billion, so it's a slightly bigger problem. And we should all have access to the same quality of life as, say, Denmark. So that would actually almost double the challenge. But this is essentially what we need to solve for. And we thought, how can we make this relatable? So we boiled it down to the scale of a single earthling. This is 100 earthlings. You could fit 1 million on a square kilometer. And if all of Earth would go to some giant Woodstock festival, we could all fit on 100 by 100 kilometers. But instead, we thought, what if we divide all of Earth into 10 billion parcels? So each of your share in all of Earth, then each of you have at your disposal 750 by 750 feet. Basically, 2/3 of it is ocean, 1/10 of it is uninhabitable, it's mountains and glaciers. And you're left with roughly 1 hectare, where half is nature, and the other half is pretty much agriculture with a little bit of city. So this is where all the problems come from. If we start with energy is almost 3/4 of the emissions, and we use energy to power our buildings, our transportation, and our industry. All of these industries can, with today's technology, be electrified. We don't have to invent anything, and once they're electrified, we can actually power them with renewables. So today, each of you, to cover your share in the total energy consumption, you consume 635 liters, almost a ton of coal, and almost 500 cubic meters of gas. You can provide the same amount of energy with only this much wind and this much solar combined. And if you want the same energy consumption as Denmark, it's a bit more. Then, of course, we need to store the energy in batteries and hydrogen. Hydrogen, you can make it with electrolysis, splitting water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen, and you can use it for fuel cells or for green fuels. You can also make fertilizer and materials. We already started converting the entire sort of a fleet of cars. There's 1 billion cars on Earth. We now have a solution to make them electric. But if you would try to power a 747 with a battery pack, it would weigh 15,000 tons, making it rather difficult to fly. So there's a whole series of activities that require hydrogen as a power source. Then when you look at our industry, some of the emissions come from the power production, so we electrify. But then most of the emissions from industry come from the chemical processes. Like when you burn lime to create concrete, you release CO2. So we can sort of change to materials that have positive impact. For instance, if you change 1 ton of concrete in a building to 1 ton of timber, you lower the carbon footprint with 2.1 tons of CO2. And essentially for many building types, that's already available. Then there's everything we throw out. We can, of course, recycle materials like metal and glass. But all the organic waste is hard to recycle. But we can gasify it, turn it into a resource. Biomethane is essentially natural gas, but it's a renewable source when it comes from turning organic waste into biomethane, and you don't have the leaks from landfills that currently contribute to climate change. So essentially, waste becomes a circular resource. And then there's the biggest footprint we have, all our agriculture. Basically, cows, when they burp and fart, they emit methane, and so does rice fields. You have, when we burn crop residue or when we sort of fertilize, we release nitrous oxide into the atmosphere. Then, of course, when we expand our agricultural land, which each of you expand 1 square meter per year, and when I say each of you, I mean myself included, one square meter per year, and you start releasing CO2 from the roots and the soil. And then we were like, what are we doing with this? This amount of crops, which is the same amount that we use to make human food, is actually energy crops. So only to turn it into biofuel. We can make the same amount of energy with photovoltaics much more effectively. Instead of burning crop residue, we can gasify it. We calculated that if Europe would gasify all of their organic waste, we could turn off the pipeline to Gazprom. And instead of leaving the land fallow, we can actually use it for grazing for cattle and fertilize the land and reduce our footprint of agriculture. And that brings us to the sort of the elephant in the room, the cow. A cow and a calf requires 2 hectares of grassland. And the belches of a cow emits 100 kilos of methane per year, equivalent to 108 tons of CO2. And you need 1 grown tree per ton of CO2 to sequester that amount of carbon. It just so happens that cows love trees. The natural habitat for large herbivores is silvopasture, the combination of grassland and trees. So by converting to silvopasture, you get happy cows, you increase biodiversity, you get higher yields, and all of the trees sequester the greenhouse gas emissions from the burps. If you look at the last 50 years, you can see with the same amount of agricultural land, we've almost or more than doubled our cereal production. So essentially, we already have proven methods of things like silvopasture, polyculture, and proven technologies that would allow us to feed the average earthling. Instead of with this much land, we could do it with this much land. And if you add to this footprint the amount of water and an area for solar, and you can even combine the solar with the cities and with agriculture and windmills with silvopasture, you can actually further reduce the footprint. But essentially, if you compare it to the original footprint that is available to all of us, you can see that we can perfectly fit within what's available. If you look at Denmark, this is what it takes to sustain a sustainable Danish population of 5.5 million, or the 330 million Americans, or all of Earth. So very simply, we arrive that with using only existing methods, we can totally accommodate within our available footprint a sustainable human population with the same quality of life as Denmark. And of course, it needs to happen at different scales. We need to sort of electrify our homes so we can power them with renewables. We need to upgrade our building envelopes to avoid heat loss or heat gain. We need to harvest the available energy. We need to build with sustainable materials. To move between our buildings, we can use a whole array of electric forms of mobility, and we can make our cities more walkable and more bikeable by making them greener. We need to sort of convert, harvest renewable energy. We need to convert our waste into a resource to power our industry and our transportation. We need to sort of optimize our land use, turn more agricultural land into nature. That will increase biodiversity, and the trees will sequester the carbon we still emit. And essentially, every time you step out, these principles should just be applied sort of systematically according to an overall plan. But we still somehow need to answer the question, what do we do when the wind isn't blowing and when the sun isn't shining? And you can see the wind output is rather irregular. This is January in UK. But our energy demand is pretty stable. So the simple answer is to simply harvest the peak loads and store them for when you need them. But it'll take time to build up this capacity of storage. So today we actually have an energy grid where of pipelines with gas and oil that we distribute energy with. So if we start connecting the regional grids, so if we take the UK location we started with, you can see each time we connect to another location where you connect both demand and energy output, you can see that the more connected the grid is, the more resilient or stable it becomes. So what would be the impact of a global grid? Basically, this is the solar output from the UK over the years. So you can see like this kind of peak in the northern summer. If you connect it to Cape Town, you have the opposite imprint. And essentially, the seasonal variation is evened out when you combine the two. Similarly, as you move from east to west, you can see there's always peak sun somewhere on the Earth. So essentially, a global grid would allow us to, in a way, power our winters with our summers by connecting north to south, and power our nights with our days by connecting east to west. So obviously, making a plan for the planet requires a set of skills and resources that are far beyond what we have at my architecture company. But actually, skills and resources that are massively present in this room. But one thing that I can already see is happening to us is that by doing this work, I and my team we've been getting a kind of awareness and a clarity that we didn't have before, and we've started aligning the projects we do with the principles of the plan for the planet. And just to give you some examples, in the spring we opened the most environmentally friendly factory in the world in Norway. It's built entirely from locally resourced timber. The facades are charred as a form of a treatment against bugs and germs. We managed to only cut down the trees 10 feet from the facade, so the fire department can still drive. But then the sun shading from the evergreen trees actually shades the factory. And as a result of being built out of mass timber, it becomes a beautiful space. Like it's almost like a museum-grade manufacturing space. But what you're looking at, the beautiful timber surfaces, is actually the raw material that the building is built from. And on the roof, you have locally sourced turf and photovoltaic panels. We're also building the new airport in Zurich, entirely covered in solar tiles, entirely built out of mass timber, locally sourced Swiss timber. It is 3 times bigger than the second largest wood building in the world. But also again, you see that you reduce the carbon footprint of the building, but you also get this kind of very endearing and sort of warm, friendly interior. You have the control tower also holds the skylight as this kind of central pile on a central square, and the entire roof produces 2/3 of the power consumption of the whole airport. In San Jose, in Silicon Valley, we co-founded a company called Neighbor, where we're trying to use technology and productization to provide carbon-neutral multifamily homes at scale. Essentially, trying to sort of by committing to a single sort of typology, we can actually create a whole array of different architectures within this single consumer-facing system. Inside, built out of mass timber, you get the benefits of the wood and the carbon footprint. We're going vertical with these 3 buildings in the spring. For Johns Hopkins, we are collecting all of their student activities under this solar-powered timber village, where again the choices of materials not only have an impact on the environmental performance, but also on the sort of enjoyment of the students. In Milan, we are creating this work environment covered by a giant solar canopy made out of dowel laminated timber to shade and shelter the life of the city, and also to create these shortcuts between the different floors of the workplace. And for the European Commission in Sevilla, we are building their joint research center, which is essentially half a building for the European Commission on sustainable construction and half a public square. And Sevilla is extremely warm. It's basically North Africa. So it actually makes the public square more enjoyable, but it also allows for the public to look into the now transparent facade of the European Commission, because the sun is already shaded before it hits the building. We recently presented this project at the Vatican, and if you ever have to visit the Pope and you wonder what to give him, if you ask Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the EU, she gave him a framed photo of our design. I had to call that out. And then in Silicon Valley, we've been working on the work environment for Google, and we got the opportunity to somehow tailor our architecture to the organizational architecture of Google. So they're organized in teams and neighborhoods. The neighborhoods are up to 150 people. And the dream was to actually accommodate 3,000 Googlers in the equivalent of a town. So typically what you have is that you have all the support functions, like the labs, the meeting rooms, the famous snack kitchens that sort of clutter the floor plate. So we organize the whole environment on 2 different levels. Above, you have 20 platforms with 150 people each. Each platform is the height of a desk higher than its neighbor. So even if you're in the middle, you're not sort of incarcerated, but everybody is connected. And then you have these courtyards that connect to the more sort of busy Medina-like environment below. And in each courtyard, a column holds this kind of solar canopy that covers the entire building. So you have these like gentle smiles that let in the perfect amount of daylight, and then the rest is converted into power. So here you see the first 3 out of 4 buildings. The only facade material nicknamed dragon scales by the Googlers is essentially a Swiss photovoltaic product that we found. The textured glass captures more light and makes it less reflective, so it's actually both beautiful and high performing. Inside, the smiles are proportioned to let in the perfect amount of daylight. The catenary curve of the grid shell gives you the optimum use of steel, so you get the longest span with the minimum amount of steel. And within this, you can sort of organize the environment in any kind of way. So I think all of these are sort of examples of how our sustainable future can not only be better for the environment, can also be more sort of fun to work in and more beautiful to live in. And sort of moving a little bit up in scale. A few years ago, I met this guy on your left. It's Akio Toyoda, the great-grandchild of the founder of Toyota. And he told me that Toyota used to be a loom manufacturer, making very large looms for the textile industry. So when the car came, their ability to manufacture complex machines made them able to become the largest car maker in the world. They made the first mass-produced hybrid, and now they're sort of diversifying into a whole family of different kinds of personal mobility. And he was basically saying that he realized they had to pivot again. So from a loom maker to a car maker, they now had to go from a car maker to a provider of urban mobility. And therefore, he needed a living, working laboratory where he could test urban mobility at a systemic scale. So we started sort of analyzing what happens on the street. And you can say today, everything happens on the street. So you have like everything, but also in a way, nothing everywhere. So we split the street in 3 different kinds of streets. One for autonomous vehicles and pedestrians, more like a traditional street. One for different kinds of personal mobility, like e-bikes and scooters, more like a promenade. And one where you can only walk through essentially a park. And then by weaving these 3 types of streets together in both directions, we get this kind of woven city fabric where you can take an electric car from anywhere to anywhere. You can bike on a promenade from anywhere to anywhere. But you can also walk through a green park from any city block to any city block. Of course, we include all the principles from the Plan for the Planet, the photovoltaic roofs, the environmentally friendly materials. And within this matrix, they can study the interaction of different kinds of pedestrians and vehicles. We have a fuel cell-based energy supply, turning geothermal into hydrogen. We work with domestic robotics inside the homes. But what I essentially sort of love about this project is that we got commissioned by a car maker to imagine the city of the future, and the result in the woven city is a city where 2/3 of the right-of-way that is normally sort of reserved for the car is now sort of given over to more interesting forms of life, including, of course, city life, but also plant life and animal life. So we've gone vertical on the first phase you see in the foreground, and the intention is, of course, to use it as a sort of constant and ever-changing laboratory to accelerate technologies for urban mobility. And even though it's purpose-built, the principles can be applied in cities as diverse as Barcelona, New York, and Tokyo. So moving a little bit on to, I moved to New York in 2010, and 3 years later, Hurricane Sandy came and sort of wiped out all of Lower Manhattan. And we got invited to see if we could imagine a way to protect Manhattan from the next Sandy. And we thought, instead of sort of creating a seawall that segregates the life of the city from the water around it, we got inspired by the High Line. The High Line essentially is decommissioned train tracks that have now become like this kind of popular oasis for the life of the city. So we thought, what if we could design the resiliency infrastructure so we don't have to wait until it gets shut down before it becomes nice? What if we can design it with premeditated positive social side effects? So we reached out to the local community, and we invited the different user groups and different sort of interest organizations all along the waterfront of Manhattan to tell us what they wanted. So, for instance, under the FDR, a series of linear furniture is tall enough to actually withstand the incoming storm surge. Deployable art walls can come down from the FDR. Further up in the East River Park, Imagine like rolling hills that protect the park from the noise of the highway, but also protect the city from potential storm surge. So you can almost say like hedonistic resilience, that basically we take all of the necessary hard engineering to withstand a storm surge, and we design it in a way that if you go there, you won't see any evidence of the Army Corps of Engineers. You'll just see a revitalized waterfront that is more accessible and more enjoyable to the people that live in it. So we're in the process of realizing the east portion and the Battery Park City portion. This phenomenon that New York is experiencing is actually sort of endemic to all major cities in the world. All major cities will have to start dealing with rising sea levels. It just so happens that on any given day, there's 2 to 3 million people on Earth living permanently at sea in the offshore and shipping industries. So we got approached by UN Habitat and a company called Oceanics to see if we could create a city or a system for a city on the foundation of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations that could be a prototypical floating city. It has now turned into a full-blown venture. And the basic idea is to essentially source all energy locally from renewable sources, deal with collecting and cleaning water locally as well, be sort of autonomous when it comes to food production, which means we had to eliminate dairy and beef. It's simply too space consuming, as you could see in the Plan for the Planet. So it's a pescatarian, vegetarian community. You can import Wagyu if you have to, but and then basically also use all of the waste as a resource to recycle and upcycle and turn into energy. And you can say when you design a typical master plan for a city, you sort of analyze the topography and you create a series of roads and building blocks. Here we sort of started with all the available renewable resources and in a way designed a man-made ecosystem for the city. It's basically based on a pontoon, which is like an island the size of a city block. It can be prefabricated and towed to location. Beneath, you have then all of the back of house. The space you need to make the city float is also where you have all of your energy, water, waste, and food infrastructure. We can plug in different waterfront conditions so that each island can be unique. We keep it relatively low rise to keep the center of gravity low. But then, of course, you can imagine any kind of architecture on top of this sort of man-made archipelago. And the basic principles are that you always use the green space to make the city more livable as polycultural food production. Use very light and renewable materials for the construction, and you harvest all the energy you can on the roofs and on the barrier islands. So you end up with this kind of almost like vertical master plan where you have high yield agriculture, you have sort of aeroponics, aquaponics, and as you go further below you get ocean farming, and finally using biorock reef, which is this material that actually solidifies from salt water and creates artificial artificial but sort of organic reefs on the bottom. So if you see again, this is a single city block, 300 residents. A sort of a neighborhood, and finally the city itself. Just by comparison, this is Manhattan, and of course you can imagine that because it's so mobile, unlike any other city, it can actually sort of grow and reconfigure at various scales. So this is the first sort of idea of a floating town designed to exist within a protected body of water, like in a bay. As you approach, of course, you see the citizens of the city sort of moving around in different kinds of aquatic mobility. The Central Park, which is essentially a big marina. The polycultural farms, that is also the social space. The greenhouses that are also like community buildings. And even the space below is a significant part of the public realm. This kind of local marina for the neighborhood. And then, of course, the architecture on top can be completely different to the different tastes of the different cultures or nationalities. We're starting with the first 3 floating city blocks in the port of Busan in Korea. And the idea is that if they turn out to be successful, and of course this is simply an expansion of the city of Busan, so we can sort of expand within the port, and once the technology for sustainable living becomes more mature and reaches scale, you can even take some of those principles and bring them back on land. And the idea is to use Busan as a market-based economy, so expanding very valuable land to begin with. But then once we reach economies of scale, once a city like Miami needs it, you actually have it available, and you even have entire countries whose future existence might be dependent on this kind of technology. So yeah. That in a way brings me to the last aspect, and you can say, like, as an architect, it's very rare that you get to design anything that has an impact at a planetary scale. But through our work on the Plan for the Planet, we got in contact with Maersk. Every fifth, or you can turn it down, every 5th container in the world has the 7-pointed star on it. And Maersk told us that they are committing to converting their entire fleet to methanol that is made from basically turning renewable power from wind and sun into hydrogen and oxygen with electrolysis. So they need to turn their ports into green growth hubs where they can not only power their own fleet, but also power the port itself. They can then create sort of a carbon neutral steel. They can make a carbon neutral agriculture. They can make fertilizer in a renewable and sustainable way. And essentially imagine that as the fleet of Maersk, every 5th container in the world is theirs, sails around the world, starting with the port in Tangier. Every port that they touch becomes a catalyst for the energy transformation of that port, that city, and maybe even that country. So we already started with Tangier, Savannah, and Aqaba in Jordan. And the carbon footprint of Maersk as a country is twice the size of Denmark's. So if you can help Maersk go carbon neutral, it will actually have an impact at a planetary scale. So maybe sort of to end and back to this idea of why we believe that there is value in making a plan for the planet, is that it has deeply influenced my own view on the sort of energy transformation and the view of my organization and that of Maersk. And I think it can do the same for everybody who gets this access to understand the complexities in a tangible and actionable way. So we were thinking, like, just like if we want to know something, we Google it. And if we want to know more about it, we'll go through Wikipedia, and maybe from there we'll follow the index. So imagine if Plan for the Planet could be a sort of open source, crowd-funded online resource where if you get elected mayor in a small town, or if you become the chief supply chain officer for a startup company, you can actually go to planforplanet.org, and you can sort of, in a way, download, you can quickly educate yourself, and you can download very actionable and tangible actions that you can take from your particular position, and it can point you to the right technologies, the right collaborators to implement what you can do in realizing this plan. So we've literally just sort of set up the framework for Plan for the Planet, but given the amount of skills and resources in this room, if any of you feel inspired or called to contribute with knowledge or resources of whatever form, please come visit us and sign up, and we'll keep you informed and try to get you involved. So on that note.